Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and for those who are watching this as a recording later on, thanks for tuning in. My name is Sean Alexander, and I serve as the Assistant Director of Instruction at Arkansas Boys State. I'm really excited for this next part of tonight's program, which is going to be a panel discussion focusing on exploring some of the topics raised by the film that many of us just watched. Together, we've got this panel of 6 citizens representing Boys State programs from across the country. And we're going to have a conversation about sort of 3 topics. The first, the Boys State experience and the different forms that takes across the country. Second, the influence that Boys State had on them as individuals. And then third, how you, the audience, can get engaged as citizens in your community, your state, and your nation. At the end, we'll have some time for questions, I think about 15 minutes, hopefully. So please submit those using the Q&A feature. If you have any questions about that, I'm sure you could send a chat to one of us on the panel and we can try to troubleshoot those issues. To get us started, I want to begin with some brief introductions because at least right now, we're all strangers, but I hope by the end of the night, we're not all strangers. And so I'd love to start just with quick introductions, in particular, name, state, delegate year if it's relevant, the program that maybe you work at if it's relevant, and then what kind of you're currently up to, just to give people a sense of what you're bringing to the conversation. Lenny, do you mind if I start with you?
No problem. My name is Len Bendo, 1985 delegate to California Boys State. With almost 35 years combined on staff for California Boys State, Florida Boys State, Boys Nation, and actually 1 year at Arkansas Boys State. Closed my corporate career as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Heinz Company, and now serving as President for the History Center in Orlando and on the Board of Directors for Lambda Chi Alpha Fraternity. Thanks for being here.
Great. Ben, do you mind going next?
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with this distinguished group of panelists tonight. My name's Ben Schafer, 2014 New York Boys State and Boys Nation alumnus, and I've been on the Boys Nation staff for the past 5 years. I'm a historian in training currently. I just finished up a master's degree, taking this year off to do some research work, and I'm applying for doctoral programs in history to start in the next academic year. And it's a real honor to be here tonight. Thanks, Sean, for doing this.
Paul, I'm going to go to you next.
Sure, thank you. My name is Paul Williams. I'm from Wisconsin's Boys State program, otherwise known as Badger Boys State. And I was a citizen in 2005. I've been on the staff for 15 years and have been in the leadership type roles with that program in a series of different ways since about 2010. So I currently work at a transportation company called US Venture up in Wisconsin. And like everybody else, thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Cool. Jesus, I'm going to go to you next.
All right, hi, my name is Jesus, and I was a 2016 delegate at Arkansas Boys State, and I went to Boys Nation in 2016 as well. I'm currently a junior counselor at that program, and kind of on a more personal note, I'm currently a student at the University of Arkansas. I'm in a dual degree program in finance and political science. And on an even more personal note, I recently got on homecoming court at the university, which is super exciting. Go Hogs. So yeah.
Love it. Jason, I'm going to go to you next.
Good evening, everyone, and I too am excited to be on here tonight. My name is Jason Jones. I am a 1997 Alabama Boys State delegate. I currently serve on the Alabama Boys State staff as the assistant director. I've been doing that for 23 years, combined with the year I attended Boys State, and I was fortunate enough to attend Boys Nation as well. Currently, I am a civil servant with the Department of Defense. I'm a branch chief for PEO Aviation here in Huntsville, Alabama. And I also am a licensed attorney, and I have my own law firm here.
And last but not least, Jeromy.
Good evening. My name is Jeromy. I'm a 2019 delegate of Arkansas Boys State. I also went to Boys Nation. I serve as now, by luck, the 2019 and 2020 Arkansas Boys State governor by chance. On a personal note, I am a freshman at the University of Central Arkansas. Go Bears. I'm part of many different clubs or organizations, and I serve as, well, hopefully next year when we're all in person, I serve as a junior counselor for Arkansas Boys State staff.
Great. Thanks, everyone. You can see we've got a big range of folks here, and I'm excited for the conversation we'll have as a result of the range of experiences we're bringing. I want to dive in now, for the next 15 minutes or so, to talk about basically the Boys State experience. It feels like the easiest place to begin this because of, I think, what we just saw in the film, right? A really intimate depiction of a particular Boys State program. And so, the film, just as I was mentioning, depicts a specific Boys State program through the eyes of four specific, what they call statesmen, but in many other programs we call citizens. But Boys State programs differ, right? And obviously every one of us would have had a different experience at our particular Boys State programs. And so, Jason, if you don't mind, I'm going to actually go to you first with the first question here. I'm curious how the experience depicted in the film compared with your own Boys State experience.
Good evening again. With respect to the film, it was broadly, it was pretty accurate to the general approach to Boys State. Specifically, I think that being that I went to Boys State in 1997, the ability to use so much of the social media and things, those things weren't there, where I just used poster board and markers for a lot of things that I did. Beyond that, I think the biggest thing that I think that it left out, I guess it depicted it some, was the many relationships that are built with the other delegates. The thing I most remember about Boys State is that when I got to my freshman year of college, seeing the number of other freshmen who had on those Boys State shirts, and it just made an immediate connection. So for me, while in general it was somewhat accurate of the experience, I think what I did not see, and then I don't think it depicted it as extremely well, was although Texas may have 1,100 Boys State, here in Alabama we have about 600 to 700. You really make a lot of connections with people based on the ability to go to Boys State.
That's excellent. And actually on this point, just bring it closer to home. Jesus, I'd be curious your perspective as someone who attended Arkansas Boys State, a program that many of us are more familiar with, perhaps.
I'm going to agree with Jason in that a lot of the same spirit that is brought to Texas Boys State is brought to Arkansas Boys State. People, the delegates come in excited and pumped, and I think ready to experience something that they've heard a lot of rumors about, but don't really know quite exactly what to expect. And then some people come in with the perspective of, hey, I was nominated by somebody I think of as a role model. I have no interest in being here, but I'm excited. I guess I'll give it what I've got. And so I think that what makes Arkansas Boys State so amazing is all those perspectives coming together, right? And the people that didn't want to do so much, like just giving it their all and actually succeeding in something they didn't think they were going to be able to. And then the people that did give it their all and came in super excited and had a plan if they fail in it, learning how to cope with that, learning how to move on with that. And that's something obviously that was shown in the documentary. Obviously there are a lot of differences in the way of structure of election and what each program focuses on more than the other, particularly surrounding the election. I thought that was very at the center of everything with Texas Boys State, but with Arkansas, there's a lot of, I'd say, more personal growth and development as an individual with our leadership discussions. But either way, I mean, I think that both are incredible approaches, and I was really excited to gain that perspective.
So yeah, Paul, I'll go to you next, just rounding out our perspective. I've heard a little bit about Wisconsin Boys State, and I'd be curious to hear a bit about how you guys approach things and what resonated from the film and maybe what didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, number one, I know that Arkansas and Wisconsin follow very closely in that leadership and personal development is a big part of our programs. So we align very closely in that. And I think Jesus brought something up that was interesting in that there's a lot of guys that don't know what they're walking into. And I, for one, had a horrendous attitude walking into my Boy State experience. But very quickly, realizing that thinking very arrogantly that I was going to be a big fish in a small pond, and realizing that I am amongst whales. And that is the big thing, the big energy that I took out of my experience right off the bat of I am not that good here, and really having to live up to a standard, and it really raised my game. So one of our old directors always said, you'll be known by the company that you keep. And, so many wonderful friendships in my 15 years on staff, especially, that's been so true. So, I mean, Wisconsin ain't Texas. I will tell you that much. And, one of the things that the movie doesn't depict as much to me are those local elections, because that's really where the growth and the friendships and the real discussion happen, as opposed to just campaign tactics. So it's very different in that end, but certainly the state election is a big deal too.
So a couple of things that people have actually brought up already, I think, are the role that personal relationships play. And so the next question that I have is actually in response to what I felt like was one of the more moving scenes in the film. And that was, after Stephen loses the election, he's sitting in this chair in what appears to, I think, be like a dorm lobby of some kind. And he's calling his mom, but he's having these friends of his, come up, these fellow citizens who he didn't know, presumably before Boy State. And, they're both crying over this incredibly emotional experience. And he's explaining to his mom, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because my friends are coming up, expressing how proud they are of me and how much they've learned from me. And I think it's this really moving experience. And, every person who I've known that has gone to a Boy State or a Girl State program has expressed, I think, a similar sense of that the relationships are what you really take away. And so I'm curious for people's, perspectives on this. And Ben, if it's okay, I'll go to you first on this. In what ways did the relationships that you build at Boy State impact and influence your experience? And also, what did you learn about building relationships at Boy State?
I think it's such a great question, and it's telling too that, Jason, Jesus, and Paul all mentioned relationships as being the bedrock of an important part of the Boy State experience. In New York, the Boy State program has a really strong attachment to the military. There is a Marine encampment that comes in and runs the program for you for a week. That was something that I didn't expect at all, but part of that is everybody shows up and you're assigned a citizen number. So to all of your counselors, to all of the Marines who are in charge of marching you and giving you PT and everything else, you're just your citizen number. You're not somebody from Buffalo like myself, or you're not a Democrat or Republican, or, all of the other labels that you attach, they just go out the door. And in New York, you don't have phones, no electronics, anything. So you're really just totally off the grid for a week. And really the only way to survive is to build really great relationships. And that was the beauty of that program for me, which was saying, New York is a huge state. There were people from all over the state, places that I had never been to, that I only had ever heard of. And people from those towns became some of my closest friends in that program, and people that I still, if I think I'm walking and I think about one of the Marine chants that we had to all do while we were marching somewhere, I'll text one of my buddies to this day, 6 years after the program, hey, that chant came up in my head again, hope you're doing well. And because that's really what it is. It's about saying that the most important part of this experience is stripping away the labels that we carry ourselves with at a really important developmental period in our lives, to say, what can we do together if we're just human beings united around a common cause? And I think that's the beauty of a boys state, girls state, boys nation, girls nation program.
Hey, Suze, I'm going to go to you next on this because you brought up a couple of things about the Arkansas Boys State program curricularly, leadership discussion, some of these curricular components that emphasize, personal interaction, right? And personal growth that is sort of different and separate from the electoral process. I'm curious if you could speak to some of this. I mean, how did relationships play a role in your experience at Arkansas Boys State? And, what did you learn about building relationships from that time?
Right. In the words of Ben, I'm somewhat of a political junkie, right? So I think that that's something that obviously I love and enjoy about the program. But something I wasn't expecting to love and enjoy about the program were the leadership discussions. And that's something that is built into the structure of the program. And what's interesting is that, I'm originally from New York, so from Ben's neck of the woods, and I moved to Arkansas when I started high school, and it's my summer of my junior year, going into my senior year, I go to this place where people come from all walks of life from the state of Arkansas. It's like you live in Little Rock, and obviously Little Rock isn't necessarily akin to Yonkers or New York City, right? But it's still a major city. It's the biggest city in our state, and so meeting people from Stamps, Arkansas, and meeting people from Crowley's Ridge, right? Like those are they may be for similar demographics, but those are very different types of people. And so kind of having the opportunity and the privilege to meet people like that I never thought I was going to get to meet, like was phenomenal. And so kind of tying into like how I've grown personally through that experience, I mean, it was crazy when I was running for Boys Nation. Those relationships pushed me to do things I wouldn't have done otherwise. I thought, you know what, I'm going to apply for Boys Nation and I'm going to see how it goes. And, I'm not the most qualified guy in the room, so there's no way I'd get it. And it was that support and that help from my friends and the people that I met literally 3 days ago. I really want to emphasize this for the people that haven't attended Boys State yet, that you meet these people in the course of a week and all of a sudden you become friends for a lifetime. And so I'd say the most vivid memory I have is leaving at the end of the week after, I got Boys Nation and everything, and it felt like I peaked in my life at the age of 17 and I was never going to accomplish anything else. And it really was solidified when my parents are picking me up and all of a sudden all of Rooks County starts chanting my name. It's like never in a million years did I think that I was going to have enough clout among any group of guys to get them to start chanting my name. So that I think speaks volumes to the personal relationships that are developed. And I think that is really manifested in things like the leadership discussion. So I live and die by those, and any program that has any questions about that, I'm super happy to talk about it because it's really an awesome part of our program.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you emphasize those aspects of, because in the case of all of our programs, I think, but in particular, based on my experience, the Arkansas Boys State program, it is maybe not unique, but an important aspect of it is the fact that kids, I think, are coming virtually from every county in the state. So all 75 counties in the state are represented in some way. And I think it really then sort of plays into, I think, at least in the case of Arkansas Boys State, showing some of the diversity of the state, right, in a bunch of different ways. And so the next topic actually on this point that I want to just talk about a bit, I think, is something that Renee raises multiple times, right, and that is really salient questions about the way that race manifests, plays out, influences the dynamics of the Boys State experience. And so, Lenny, I'd be curious if you'd be willing. I know you've, thought a lot about this, both professionally, right, but also personally. And so I'd be excited to hear, your reflections, hearing that from Renee, and maybe how that related to your experience, delegate, counselor, staff.
Sure. So, in my opinion, there's always that potential of racial divide in any Boys State session, and I think they covered it delicately in the film, but I'll say each program will be different, whether it's by year or by state. And I'm lucky to have that multi-program perspective with 3 different states. and then that for Boys Nation, where I think it's really less of an issue there. But my experience with California dealt mostly with the Hispanic divide, Mexican to be specific, and that would be similar to what you might have seen with this Texas Boys State documentary. Florida Boys State is a little bit different in that it provides an avenue for the law enforcement on their staff. They comprise about a third of the staff there to interface with delegates in a really positive manner when you have this Blue Lives versus Black Lives Matter issue that goes on. But here's what I'll say. I believe Jeromy and Jesus can share some of their perspective on Arkansas Boys State. I do love how Arkansas Boys State really does the best job nationwide in bringing together Black and white delegates and allowing them to interface in a really positive manner. They allow them to those delegates who have had little or no interaction with those of the opposite race in some of the cities that Jesus referred to that I've never even heard of, and better yet, coming out of it with a personal, meaningful connection with those that they spend a week with. And I think that's one of the unique things that Arkansas Boys State really offers that I don't see at California or any of the other programs that I go to. So hats off to Arkansas Boys State in allowing that racial divide to become less of an issue.
So Jeromy, I'm going to pivot to you next, right? Because you're someone that can speak to the Arkansas Boys State experience. You were elected governor a couple of years ago, but I've also been someone who's now served on staff for a time. So, what reflections do you have sort of on this topic of race in Boys State?
When I first made it to Boys State, it was different. I seen a lot of different people at different tables in the hyper, picking up shirts, and it was like, okay, I didn't know what I signed up for. All I knew was my counselor said, "You're going," and that's all I knew. And so when I got there and I saw different people picking up shirts and finding their housing assignments and different things like that, I was like, okay, this is going to be an interesting week. And I got to my room, and my roommate and his mom they're already there, and he's making up his bed, and I'm talking to his mom, and he's from Russellville, and I'm from Eudora, and we automatically clicked. We just got to talking about school and sports and different things like that, and it's just me knowing him for less than 5 minutes became a brother. And he's actually part of the reason why I ran for governor and for Boys Nation. Me and him sat up and we talked about the different positions there. And I don't think there was a big problem with the race detail at Arkansas Boys State because it's such a diverse group of young men. I never knew Asian people stayed in the state of Arkansas. I didn't know that. I didn't know what I was expecting, but that's not what I was expecting. I've seen Asian, I've seen Japanese young men, Latinos, Mexicans, white, Black, you name it, they were there. And we all became a family real quick. And I really enjoyed that about Arkansas. Arkansas Boys State.
So I think just in the interest of time, I'd like to transition to the next topic. And that is actually, I think, something that we've begun to allude to in a couple of different places, but I'd like to kind of hit it more directly. And that's the influence that Boys State has had on us, the impact, of Boys State on our lives. So I think this comes out, I can't really recall in the film, but the national tagline for American Legion Boys State is a week that shapes a lifetime, or some derivative of that. Sometimes it's written differently. And I'm curious to hear a few different perspectives from folks on how Boys State has shaped your life in the years that have followed, perhaps since your delegate year. We're lucky. We have folks actually from a few different points on the age spectrum here. I'm not calling anyone old. But I'd love to kind of hit a few different age brackets, as it were. So Lenny, no offense, but I'm gonna go to you first. Would you mind just talking a bit about how Boys State has shaped your life and, looking back on that time, what it's meant to you?
Yeah, no problem. I am the oldest one on the panel, so I don't mind you pointing that out. So the main thing I noticed and learned at Boys State through all of the speeches, the debates, and the campaigns is the power of inspiring others. And I think what I saw as the most effective and the skill that I took away and use in my personal and professional life was the way the most successful candidates and campaigns consistently worked long term. And it was to help those with differing opinions understand your point of view. And it wasn't by attacking your opponent or their point of view, because that never works. You're never going to get anybody to come to your side or come to your understanding by saying so-and-so is terrible or use an expletive or whatever. That never, ever works. But if you share your life experience or a perspective or a story of something that touched you, so that the other side might be empathetic to your position or the knowledge that you may have gained on a particular issue, that's more likely to sway their, or at least soften their position and understanding of, okay, this is why the other side or someone else feels differently than I do. I've used this in my professional, my corporate career. I've used it on my personal one-on-one relationships. I've used it in volunteer work. And that was one thing that they didn't specifically teach me, but it was one thing that I think many of the folks on here indirectly take away from this program. You'll find, and it will be not necessarily just from Boys State, that again, those that are able to inspire you to understand your point of view will be the most effective in helping them understand that. And I'm thankful that Boys State taught me that lesson and that skill.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's one of the things that you see depicted in the race between, I guess, Eddie and Steven, right? Are these different tactics? And I think maybe somewhat unfortunately, maybe a more cynical manifestation of politics wins out there. I think if there are questions that the audience have, or if we have time at the end, we can explore aspects of that. But I think, Lenny, you raise a really important part of this, right? Which is, coalition building. I think it relates back to some of our conversation around relationship building. So such a critical piece, I think, of Boys State for a lot of folks. Jason, I'll go to you next on this. So I think, I don't know if you're in the middle of the age spectrum here, but I think you also are coming from a different program. You also serve in an administrative role in that program. And so I'd be curious your perspective on how Boys State looking back has shaped your life.
All right, I am younger than Lenny. I won't say how much, but yeah. So yeah, thanks. No, I mean, the biggest thing, and like you said, with the national tagline being a week that shapes you for a lifetime, in Alabama Boys State, our motto is we build citizens. And a lot of the focus of that is the fact that, hey, even though we have all these statewide elections, the purpose of the week is building citizenship. And what does citizenship look like? It looks like being active in your community and having influence. And influence lasts longer than terms in office. Influence lasts longer. So with that, one thing that I've done, and I know we're talking about beyond return to Boys State, but going to Boys State every year and volunteering there. I'm active in local politics. I serve on the executive committee of a party here in Alabama. And I used to be an educator, not a school teacher, but I worked with a federal program, and in that federal program, having the ability to educate and watch people grow and have influence on future generations. Beyond that, I think one of the most important things that I learned from Boys State is I never want to be the last. It's okay to be the first. You might have to open the door, but never be the last. And what does that mean? As I serve on different boards and things like that, I don't want to be the only anything in a room. I never want to be the last. I don't want to be said that, hey, Jason was the last. So it's about expanding your influence and building branches. As we watch sports and things, and you start thinking about football and head coaches, and they start talking about, hey, this person came from, you know, Chuck Nolan tree and the Tony Dungy tree and where they are now. You know, that's how you look at life, you know, and even today, as I look on Facebook, I look at people who I was fortunate enough to have influence in, and now they're doctors, now they're lawyers. Now I look at the things they're doing in the community, and one of them, you know, a few of them won statewide office in other states, and one of them is the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin right now. And that young man is somebody that I influenced when he was in college. Those kind of things are what makes me understand what it means to build citizenship and having lasting influence. And I hope that answers the question, Sean.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And I promise we didn't plant Jason and Paul because of that connection. But no, that's really cool and pretty special. So I'm going to ask, you know, in the same vein, you know, same flavor, I suppose, but a different version of this question. And I'm going to go, Paul, to you first, if that's okay. You know, one thing that's striking, and I think actually kind of difficult about the film, is that it only is obviously depicting that, you know, 5-day period or however long Texas Boys State is. I mean, it's longer than that. But, you know, that period of time that they're on the University of Texas campus. In the B-roll that they show during the credits, you get a sense of what folks are up to next, right? Classic documentary technique. But unless you're sticking around for that, you don't really see what that is like. And so, you know, I'm curious, there are lessons that we learn at Boys State, and I'm curious which of those have stayed with you in the years that have followed, recognizing that the film, because of its, you know, topic, really can't really explore those, highlight those.
My experience helped me fail forward. Okay, so I did a lot of failing at Boys State. I lost a lot, and I hadn't lost a ton until I went to Boys State. You know, and there's a lot of individuals that do that are also at Boys State that don't lose until they get there, and so it was a very big slice of humble pie for me. And the nice thing about being on staff, particularly, so my Boys State experience has very much lived through, you know, the next 15 years, and that's not something that everybody gets to do. But, you know, again, when you surround yourself with people of the likes of Boys Staters or delegates in general, Girl Staters the same, you start to live up to the competition. And so being a part of a group like this has been some of the best professional development for me. Being beat up in meetings, essentially, and being told to do your research, man, before you open your mouth. That's important stuff. And I think the more that you get to be around people of that caliber, and I chose to, you know, that was a choice that I made, to stay around people like that, those high caliber individuals. That has helped me tremendously through. It helped me through college. It helped me through my first job, and helped me, you know, get to the next level. So, you know, that's, and by the way, half of my wedding party was from my Boys State experience and from my staff, right? So, I mean, you gain those friends, and they teach you so much, and they help you grow as an individual. So, I am a product of the program through and through, but more than just the program, the people that are a part of it. It's so much more the people. You know, do I remember every election? No, but I do remember. I do remember all of those failures and how I felt about it, and how I wasn't going to let that happen again. So it was a real teaching moment all the way through for me.
That's excellent. And
also, Lenny, you're 20 years older than I am, and I look 10 years older than you. That is not okay.
So Ben, I'm going to go to you next. Maybe a little closer to home, right? Boys State's not as far removed for you. What's some of the lessons that stick with you?
Yeah, you know, it's I really agree with so much of what Paul said. And rather than reiterating it, because I probably wouldn't do as good of a job articulating the way that he did, I'll zoom out to look at the lesson that I learned about America, about our democracy, about what it means to be a citizen. And I think that's something that, I came of age to. I was my first election was the 2014 fall midterm. So I came of age politically in a very tense America. And my first presidential election was the 2016 presidential election. Right. So, I basically was armed with the tools of democracy 3 months before a lot of, pretty crazy things started happening in American politics. So I don't know if anyone has heard on this call, but there's a very little known Arkansas Boys State alumnus called Bill Clinton. He said in his first inaugural address, as a historian, I have to quote something from history. So here it is. That there's nothing that's wrong with America that can't be cured by what's right with America. And I think about Boys State and Boys Nation and my experience with both programs, both as a delegate and as a staff member, as being one of those shining examples of what is right with America, which is to say, we're going to take young people at a really impressionable age where they're both intelligent and excited, but probably lack maybe some of the nuance of adulthood that would help participation. And we're going to give them the opportunity to do this without a lot of high stakes, but with a ton of opportunity for personal development. And then finish that program committed to staying engaged, from the town level all the way up to the national level. And the idea that, you're committing to the country and the idea for the long term, whether you're a plumber or a politician, a businessman or anything else, right? It's about how you act as a citizen is what this program is all about. And that's one lesson that I will always believe that no matter how crazy the times are, and boy, are we living through crazy times right now, we can get better and we can do better because of what we already have within us. And Boys State really helped cultivate that mentality for me.
That's great. Jeromy, I'm going to give you the last thought on this. You're someone who's actually, I think, the least removed, if that's the right way of constructing that sentence, the least removed from Boys State. You experienced it the most recently. What are some of the things that have stuck with you in the couple of years since you've been a delegate?
Something that everybody hears all the time: never judge a book by its cover. When I've heard rumors about Arkansas Boys State, it's not colored friendly, or it's more so politics than anything. And, you won't enjoy it because that's not your type of people. And when I got there, it wasn't even like that. Even when I went to Boys Nation, even though there was a lot of politics talk, they still it wasn't politics focused. It was literally a week that shapes a lifetime. I'm not a crier, but I cried during that week of Boys State because you hear about where people come from and what they've gone through, and you take it and you apply it to your own life, and you remember, okay, well, I'm not as bad off as he is, or I've been through that and I've gone through it. And to see somebody going through it and to see where you've come from as a person and how you've grown, it truly changes your mentality as a person. I'll never forget when I got elected, when Mr. Jackson called my name. Me and a good friend that I met at Boys State was the last two running for governor. And when me and him, we sat next to each other and waited after the talent show. And after the talent show, Mr. Jackson gets on stage and he's announcing these positions. And it was a sense of, really? I only know a handful of these people, and I can only remember at least two people's names. And they elected me to do this. And then when I got to DC and met Ben and a lot of other young men in America and realized, okay, all right, yeah, I can do this. At Boy State, I didn't lose a lot because I got governor and got to DC and other things. But when I got to Nation, it was more of a wake-up call. It was like, just because you win don't mean you're not going to lose sometimes. And so those are the things that have really stuck with me through the years. You know, win, be prepared to lose. Wherever the chips fall, you go and you learn from it.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that I just want to pull out of this because I think it's really striking is, you know, I remember talking with my own junior counselor, he may be in the audience, who's now someone I work really closely with at Boys State, a guy named David Satterfield, Camden, Arkansas. And, you know, he was a hugely inspiring figure for me. And I was talking to him a few years later. We were on staff together at this point. And I said, David, what's the difference between me as a high school junior and now? And he said one thing, confidence. And he thinks that Boys State was that real confidence booster for me. I had never given a speech in front of a group of people that large, right? And so, you know, I hear people talk about some of the relationships, the failures, and what those taught you, you know, the opportunities to be with other people as they're learning to be citizens and engage in the world around them. And I think all of that, despite being an emotional roller coaster of highs and lows, it is in a way hugely confidence building for so many people. And so, Jeromy, I really appreciate you highlighting some of your experience in those terms. The last topic that I want to talk about is actually maybe less about us and more about the folks who are watching. And that's how folks, in particular nominated delegates, people who were nominated to come to Boys State this year but were unable to do so given the circumstances, how they can engage as citizens in their community, in their state, and in their nation. The Boys State program, I think across the country, essentially argues that the most important role in our democracy is that of citizen. The film depicts this really important race for governor, but I think I'm left at the end feeling that much of the learning was not in you know, who won or who lost, but in how people interacted and how people interacted with the political system. So I'm interested in people's perspectives on what they've done civically since their time at Boys State, how they've tried to live up to this ideal as an active and engaged citizen. You know, Jason's points about how Alabama Boys State thinks about the act of building citizens being really relevant here. There's one caveat though, you have to exclude your time as a staff member at either Boys State or Boys Nation. So Ben, I'm going to go to you first. You know, what's a civic action looking back that you're really proud of?
Voting. Voting is the most important civic action that we can all do. And I'm proud to say that I lived in the UK this past year doing a master's degree, and I made sure that my local board of elections knew exactly where I was going to be and mailed me my ballots overseas so that I could vote in my town council election, in which maybe 1,000 people vote each year. And I'm actually, and I'll even look forward to probably the second thing about which I'm most excited civically is that this election on November 3rd, I'll be working as a poll worker in Buffalo. I think voting is the most important thing. And then the second most important thing is making sure that everyone else has the opportunity to vote in a free and fair election. So I'm really excited to do that too.
That's awesome. Now, I won't do that thing where you can't say what someone else said. So Jason, your answer here can also be voting, but I'm curious. I mean, you've talked about some of the work that you've done in the public sphere. What's a civic action that you're really proud of? So,
I mean, I talked about a lot earlier that I guess covered this question, so I'm not going to take too long, and Ben just stole my answer because I already voted. I voted 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to be a poll worker as well. But I guess what I'm most proud of, I would say, is that I taught civics, and in teaching civics, when I go out on social media and I see people who I taught being active, that I would say is something that I'm most proud of. It may not be a direct civic action, but I think it indirectly as something that I sit back and I'm very proud of. And I spoke about so much on the last question that I think that it answered a lot of this. So I'm going to pull back and let one of the more experienced panelists speak.
Jeromy, I'll go to you next. What's a civic action that you're really proud of?
By me only being the age of 18, I haven't been able to vote that long. So I voted for my first time right before the pandemic happened, actually. But my most proud civic action was what led up to that voting. There was a special election for a mayor, for our mayor election, and I got on her campaign and helped her. I got out in the streets. I put up signs, put up posters, went to campaign rallies, talked to different people, wore T-shirts, buttons, and all that good stuff. So, and she won the election by a landslide, which is what I'm most proud of, because, if, and this is a huge if I decide to go into politics, I know what it takes to do it. So that's what I'm really most proud of. And I haven't voted yet. I have my ballot in my backpack. I have to put it in the mail in the morning. But yeah.
That's great. So the other question that I want to think a bit about here is, maybe a bit of advice, maybe a bit of, reflection and, sharing of experience. But I think Jeromy actually raises a really important point here, right? Many of the nominated delegates that we're talking to are probably unable to vote, right? I had a suspicion that many of us would talk about things like voting in that prior question, but many of our nominated delegates probably can't. And yet, a lot of delegates come to Boise State, either already civically engaged or not at all, and they leave extremely motivated to keep that up, but they can't vote yet in many instances. And so the question I'm sort of curious to hear people's reflections on, and advice perhaps, is what can nominated delegates do to get engaged in the civic process, the civic life now, right, as high school seniors? Lenny, I'll go to you first. What advice would you give a high school senior who's sitting at home trying to think about how to get engaged?
So I think the biggest opportunity would actually be, even if you're not of voting age, to engage by supporting a candidate that you believe in or that holds similar values through volunteering or interning at your local levels or at state level or for national candidates. I've seen that happen many a time following a delegate session. And I think, as we've said oftentimes, as soon as you're eligible to vote. I think more importantly, there's the opportunity to affect future leaders and generations through programs like American Legion Boise State, through Model UN, Junior Statesmen of America, or the Student Government Association at your higher ed institution. So getting involved that way. And then finally, if your career path actually permits to run for state, local, or even national office, do it. I think that by learning the process, whether that's the petitions or the campaigning, securing donations, etc., learn about that process and actually do it. Arkansas Boise State has several amazing examples of people running for local, state, and national office. They index higher than most states across the country. I do know that one of the delegates that I mentored within California is now mayor of one of the cities in LA County. So you will find, actually, if you poll all of Congress, that I would say the last number that we measured, over 50% went to a boy state or girl state program within their state when they were involved. So there's an opportunity for you, because I do believe that if you were selected to be a delegate for Arkansas Boys State this year, we consider you an alumni. And Lloyd, I think, may be able to verify that, Sean or somebody else within that senior leadership at Arkansas Boys State. But there's huge opportunities for you out there, especially if you learn the process.
So I'm going to go to you next on this. What advice? You're sitting at a university now. You probably have friends who are looking to get engaged. You're a self-proclaimed political junkie. What are some things that, if you were giving advice to your high school self, that you'd consider giving?
So something that I think is interesting in the dynamic between the documentary and then what we have at our program in Arkansas is that I feel like my girlfriend's from Texas, so I know very well that there's a lot of pride in their state, right? And that's very evident in the documentary. I'd say Arkansans are a prideful people as well, but our program primarily focuses on citizenship on a very large scale, right? Like how are you a good American? Like how are you a good citizen in that way? And there is focus on the local level, but I think that Boise State may have inadvertently taught me that is pride in my state, is pride in my organization, because the way I look at it now, and what I'd say to an incoming delegate is we're all in the same boat. Right? Like Americans and Arkansans, if you live in this state, we are all in the same boat. And regardless of what our political differences are, like we all should be rooting for our mutual success, regardless of whatever the circumstances are, aside from the personal name calling and this and that, right? Like having an understanding that we are all trying to work towards the same goal is important. And then that's the first step. And then figuring out what it is you care about the most within that system. And so, using the university example, I'm involved in my student government here at the University of Arkansas. And the primary thing that the primary reason I ran for ASG here is because we have an overrepresentation of students from the state of Texas at our school. There are 7 counties in our state where not a single person attends the University of Arkansas. And if you could guess, they are low income and minority counties. And so it's unfortunate that our university does not offer that platform to those students in a more effective way. And efforts have been made recently to change that, but that's where I found my niche, right? And so I'd encourage these incoming delegates to say, okay, like, what do I want to do with my life? Like, where do I want to go? Do I want to pour myself into Arkansas? Do I want to help elevate people that are at a disadvantage and give them an equal opportunity to be successful? Or is my plan to go somewhere else? And maybe I should begin to research how I could be involved there. So that's what I would say. And definitely Boise State gave me a significant kind of launching pad to really invest myself in this state and think of how can I give back to the people within my own community and how can I be involved. And that doesn't require voting if you're under the age of 18. That just requires having knowledge and being an informed citizen. That's really the best way to be civically engaged, is just know what's going on and have an opinion. So that's what I would recommend.
That's awesome. Paul, how about you?
So we're talking about, how can somebody of a high school age practice all this? And first of all, I think it's really important that, guys that didn't get to experience Boise State this year, first of all, tremendously sad. I like that. Can't be said enough. It's just too bad. But understand that one of the things that we send the guys home with is a responsibility. They've got to go back as seniors and they set the tone. They're the culture setters. And when you think about any successful, think of the towns in your state that are, perennial football state like schools or basketball schools or whatever it might be. Think about how they get there. It's starting at the top and they work their way down. They're showing the next generation the way to do business, the way to do it right. Yes, it's in sports, but it's also just in basic culture. It's the way that we talk to one another. It's the way that we set the tone. So when you're talking about, how to make a big difference in high school, you need to set the tone of what decency looks like, of what engagement looks like, and what leadership looks like. And that's going to go down from class to class to class. And are you going to see it right away? No, but you could be the seed. You're not going to see every seed that you sow. That's just the way that it is, but you can be the culture center. And when I think of, what the Boy State experience was for me, it is the initial teaching of how to influence and obtain power, right? So when you're thinking about how can you get involved now, how can you influence your school board? That's a great place to practice, or your principal or your student council. How can you influence them to get them to do the next right thing within whatever amount of power that they have, with locally. But, I think the big thing right now that we're all trying to figure out how to influence that power. I go back to my favorite Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, and that's fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. So we've all seen a lot of different ways of making a statement, making a point, especially recently. So how do you get other people to join you in that fight for the right thing? And it's going to be different wherever you are, but that's the kind of stuff that, if you can't vote right now, practice those things, practice getting involved, practice getting people to join you in what you believe is the next best thing and the next right thing for you. And, we talk about citizenship. Citizenship is community. What is best for you and your fellow community members around you? That's what it's all about.
So we're approaching the kind of scheduled end of time, but I do want to actually take the opportunity to ask one other question that's come up just in the chat as I've been speaking with folks as the panel's gone on. And I think I'll just open it up to anyone on the panel who wants to take a stab at this, and then I'll close this out. And the question is, what does Boys State get right about the political process that you wish we'd see more of in the real world?
Respectful conversation. Number one, that to me is where our youth gets it right. I mean, they just have an ability at the start to at least have the conversation and not start from a political spectrum, but a go forward type of community aspect. And I walk away, and I don't mean to go down a rabbit hole here, but one of the main things with Boys State for me, and the reason why I love to come back year after year, when people say that the next generation is the worst thing in the world, I just categorically disagree with that in its entirety. It gives me so much hope, and I can't wait to work for every one of you. Like I'm so confident in the next generation.
So I don't disagree with Paul in that it gives an opportunity for hopefully respectful conversation. I think that it's so easy for folks, whether that's this generation of delegates or their parents or the community, to live in an echo chamber and only listen to views that fit their own. I think Boys State program forces you to be outside your comfort zone, be in a rooming with somebody with possibly different points of view, being part of a city where you can't stand behind all those that agree with you. You actually have to engage with 50 different points of view. And that's a huge opportunity for you to okay, wow, I never thought about that particular perspective. And so I completely agree with Paul. It actually forces you out of your comfort zone to get out of that echo chamber and really learn about the entire spectrum, not just the one that you've always heard or that has always agreed with you.
If I could kind of just build off of that for just one moment, I think that what maybe you'd be getting at here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it humanizes the other person, right? Like it's so easy to send an angry message through a group chat or on social media calling someone out, right? But what Boys State does is it humanizes the person on the other end of that line, right? Because you have to go back to your dorm with that person. You have to eat with that person. You have to live in the same city as that person. And then if you can do it within the confines of the structure of Boys State, why can't you do it within your state? Why can't you offer that person the same humility that you offer them during that week? And I know everyone expresses it differently and practices it differently, right? But it's understanding that that is a human being that you are referring to that has different lived experiences than you do. And I think that's such an excellent point, Lenny.
Other perspectives that folks want to bring into the conversation?
Just to piggyback off of what Jesus just said, me and my Boys Nation roommate, I found this out afterwards, but our thoughts are like oil and water. It's totally different. We think differently, don't politically, personally, anyway, it's just totally different. But when you can come and you can sit down and put those political differences aside, and you can compare to, okay, well, I see where you're getting it, but this. And they'll be like, okay, I see what you're getting it, but this. And then you come to a mutual consensus on what's going on and what's been going on. There's a group chat with at least all of us 2019 delegates of Boys Nation, and we talk. And when we talk politics, we talk politics. And when we met, it was like we were congratulated because we finally did something that our actual Senate couldn't do, which was approve a bill. And it was totally awesome. But when you can come down and you can put your political differences aside, and it doesn't matter where you come from or where you've been, how much money you have in your pocket, it's humbling, I should say.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think everyone is totally spot on with this. The idea that to be in relationship with other people who think differently about things forces you to think of them as human and then try to resolve where conflicts exist. And you know, I will say my favorite day at Boys Nation every year is the delegates' least favorite day, which is the party platform debate. Because you have, you know, in either party, you've got 50 super opinionated, very articulate, incredibly smart kids, and half of the room thinks one thing and half of the room thinks the other thing, and somehow they have to come together and present something that resembles a party platform, right? And so there's kind of a standing rule at Boys Nation that we let the mess happen for about 45 minutes to an hour, unless someone comes and is like, hey, what should we do? And then you know, the JCs and the party counselors will kind of step in and say like, okay, guys, well, clearly this isn't working, so let's imagine alternatives whereby we can cool off and actually do something productive. And when the switch flips for all 50 boys, you know, within probably a 5-minute period, where they all realize like, oh my gosh, we're not going to get anything done, and you know, those nationalists are going to beat us unless we can somehow figure out a way to compromise. You know, that's awesome. I wish we could see that happen. I wish we could do that, you know, deliberatively together in every space.
And with that, I think I'm going to close us out for this evening. First off, I want to say thanks to everyone who made this possible. Thanks in particular to the Hot Springs Film Festival, who made the screening possible. Super, super excited to have been able to have done that. I also want to thank the panelists. Thanks, guys. It's late for some of us, so it's really appreciated you spending time with me and the folks watching, reflecting, and just talking about Boys State. Thanks also to the staff on the Arkansas Boys State side who made this possible. You guys did a lot of hard work, and it's really appreciated. I also want to mention that this is not going to be the last event that we do for nominated delegates from 2020. In the coming weeks, we're actually planning to host a town hall discussion tentatively with the governor of the state of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, and a journalist who are going to field questions and discuss a couple of different topics with each other. The details on that are going to be forthcoming. We're still confirming dates, to be totally candid, but you can find details about that event on social media and hopefully in your inboxes relatively soon. I really do hope that you join us for that. The last reflection that I'll offer is something that is basically a takeaway that I think we've all really expressed really frequently in this, but I think is important just to elevate as we close. So, to the nominated delegates who were not able to attend but are viewing this, and to other young people who happen to be watching, I think it's really critical that you always remember that the most important role in our democracy is that of citizen. The deadline to register to vote in Arkansas was October 5th. But if you're eligible and you're registered, I do hope that you vote. If you're unable to vote in this election, I hope that you register for the next one and that you vote in that election and the election after. If Ben can manage it from the UK, I think all of us have a responsibility to do it in our local communities. American citizenship is a priceless possession, carrying with it rights and responsibilities that we're all fortunate to share. On behalf of all of us at Arkansas Boys State, I hope you'll join us in living out a life of engaged citizenship. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a good evening and a good remainder of your weeks.